Welcome back to Please Come Back, Arsenal. I can't take it anymore. I've got nothing left. Fulham at Craven Cottage, Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, Bayern at the Allianz, Porto away, Villa away. Sorry, I should have said content warning. All incredibly frustrating games for Arsenal in 23-24 for different reasons. Games where, with a different result, who knows where last season could have gone. 3 goals scored for Arsenal in those 5 fixtures, with an XG of just 5.58 altogether, and just 1.04 from those 2 European away games. We could look at them in isolation. We missed our chances here, we were unlucky there, that player was bad that night, good that night, whatever. But I, and quite a few others that I know, feel that there's a common denominator among all those games. And what is it, you absolute nerds who know where I'm going with this? The teams mentioned in those games look to be using a mid-block. I'm sure most people know, but let's first define what a mid-block is for those people who, actually leave their house and stuff. A mid-block, according to the coach's voice, is an outer possession strategy focusing on protecting the middle third of the pitch when the opposition is attempting to build up. It looks like this, and just for comparison, a low block looks like this. You can play a high block, but at that point, if you're stepping up that high, you're probably pressing, so it might not be helpful to see it as a high block. I'd recommend watching portions of the games mentioned with footage so you can see this playing out in context, because there's obviously a degree of subjectivity to this. So I want to give 3 examples of where I felt this tactical idea, with tweaks, caused us problems last year to show you what I mean. Once you see it, it's hard to unsee. First, Porto away, mid-block as we've defined it. Porto did a really good job of remaining narrow in this kind of 4-5-1 shape, I guess you could call it, and then getting out to us quickly when we went into those wide areas they left for us, getting men around the likes of Bukayo Saka and forcing us back. They managed to create these kind of trap situations by pulling a midfielder over and into the pocket to block the ball inside, pushing the fullback up and getting the winger to press directly. In the second half, we were making different decisions and being more aggressive on the ball to combat this, including a bit more dynamic switching from an inverted Ben White at the time. But what I was impressed by was Porto's ability to keep that mid-block shape and continue to get out to us quickly for the entirety of the match, with no let-up in energy. It stopped us progressing through them, finding our outballs, creating chances, and ultimately led to the result. Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, I felt was about forcing us into errors and breaking our rhythm. They set up in a kind of 4-2-2-2 mid-block, as you see here, with Palmer and Gallagher, the energetic aggressors, in the front 2. They put a lot of men central and early, overloading us centrally, which was brave as it leaves men on the last line, but it seemed to work. We were making a lot of mistakes as they disrupted us at a rainy Stamford Bridge. For example, here, with Jorginho knocking it out as they didn't allow us to turn, and were getting into the back of our less physically dominant players like Zinchenko. We also saw Raya miscuing a few times. This lack of calm and rhythm internally meant our pivot players had to step out the block for a bit more time on the ball. But as we were rattled and Mikel didn't seem to want to drop Rice or Odegaard any further back, with few options, we were forced into speculative balls forward until it changed a bit later on. But it was too little too late, until Chelsea Chelsea'd. And finally, Bayern away. Again, a lot of time in a mid-block. This one looked to me like it was more about tracking our inside runs. Rice, Havertz and Odegaard couldn't rid themselves of Kimmich, Goretzka or even Dyer stepping out the last line, tracking every move inside. While they didn't quite have the narrowness of a Porto, so allowed a little bit more space centrally, which we tried to use, they made up for it by being razor sharp inside. So that's the what. And unless anyone else has some great explanation of why our numbers drop in those games, another common denominator I'm missing other than the mid-block, it seems irrefutable to me that Arsenal have some kind of issue when coming up against teams that set up this way. But what about the why? Why does this setup cause us so many problems? I do think we got unlucky in some of those fixtures last season. If we finish a few more chances, we might not be talking about the mid-block issues. And I always point to the fact that 2 of our most important players in terms of in possession, in build-up, were not there for us most of the season in Timber and Partey, who would have helped us find solutions to play through teams. I also think it's always worth saying, other teams get to do tactics too. We can set up in a perfect way to break down these types of scenarios, practice it all week, and then they're just really good on the day, and we don't execute. It happens. But even with those caveats, I still think there's a bit of a skills gap in this group of players. A skills gap that means I think we're particularly susceptible to being stopped in this manner. The reason I think the mid-block hurts us so much is unlike in deep build-up, for example, where I think we're one of the best teams in the world and we have a seemingly unlimited supply of ideas and formations to move through you, so much variety, we can't seem to find enough variety to our play in terms of getting through the middle third. It feels like we can get stodgy and uncreative. We all watched those games and felt the frustration, and I think we'd all like to feel we have more strings to our arrow, to deal with passing through those zones when they're blocked than we do. All too often, it felt like we got stuck behind the mid-block, passing between our centre-backs and full-backs and not quite finding different solutions as we went forward. On the ball, but unable to move through. There are, of course, a number of ways of combating a mid-block, all of which I'd like to look at and give my verdict on what I think might be able to change. Some of these methods I feel we have, but don't use. Some I think we have, but I probably wouldn't use anyway. And some I don't think we have at all and might need to look at the market. Oh my God, transfers. Oh my God, transfers. Like and subscribe. The transfers. As always, you can go through, round, or over teams. So let's look at the solutions in each of those three categories. First, over. We'll start with switches, defined as passes that travel more than 40 yards of the width of the pitch. Arsenal were third from bottom in the Premier League last season for switches, so we could definitely look at it. In this video, we discussed Declan Rice's interview with The Athletic, where he talks about Mikel Arteta's ideas about switches. There's a lot of misquoting that goes on around this, and people suggest that Mikel said he just doesn't like switches at all, but that's not true. He actually said he does like switches if you're going to gain an advantage from it. So there. God, how'd you get that wrong? Joking aside, the second part is the key part, and often with the way we set up, we don't. With a switch, you're often passing to a winger, and Saka is very often targeted by opposition and overloaded, and then your other option is finding Martinelli out wide, who's isolated on his own, as he currently is in this team, which doesn't seem to bring much advantage as he's struggling for effectiveness from out wide. We're third from bottom for a reason, as we prioritise security. If we were to press harder on this, I think it would mean we might have to drop Rice further back to find those passes early enough, as he's probably got the best range of pass in our midfield right now. But is that what we want? While it might help a touch, I don't think it's best to focus on the switches for this group of players in this dynamic. Nor do I see Mikel utilising it much based on his track record. However, if we manage to find some overlap and support for Martinelli, either from a fullback or from a midfielder who can rotate out there, it could be interesting. Next, you can try and pick out runners in behind a bit more to break down a mid-block by going over it. Imagine that Bruno Guimaraes-esque move from a Martin Ødegaard. Win the ball back, immediate ball over the top, or down that channel towards your forwards. This is one of the ways I can imagine us changing next season, but I think it will require a signing and a slight mentality shift from the players behind the ball. First, in those games mentioned earlier, we were playing with centre forwards in Jesus or Havertz who don't love those runs in behind on the last line. They can do them, but their best work comes linking, platforming and drifting, not stretching. We know Arsenal are looking for a more channel-runny centre-forward profile due to their interest in Benjamin Šeško, and although that's not happening, I would like to propose someone who has that skill in abundance. Victor Osimhen. We did scouting on Osimhen for the Canon podcast, which you can check out, but this guy moves me. And he moves centre-backs, more importantly. He loves that run in the channel, that ball around the back to latch onto and finish. He's a powerful, explosive runner who will play off the last shoulder and the last line and ensure centre-backs can't step up further, forcing teams deeper. At the moment, the options we have are brilliant, but no centre-back's worried about Kai Havertz peeling off his shoulder and running in behind. We need a profile that forces you back, not makes you jump out of your pocket. However, as mentioned, I think it will require the likes of Ødegaard, Rice and co to be a bit braver to make those passes, as well as our wide players to pick up those runs too, if that's what we're trying to do. Could Jorginho's speciality, those first-time balls over the top, become ever more important? Next, you can go through teams. Carries, carries, carries. Arsenal are behind City, Tottenham, Liverpool, Chelsea and Brighton for total progressive carrying distance in the Premier League, and I'd love to see that change. Jurriën Timber will be a massive help here, but I don't think we see enough carries from deep with Rice nor Saliba, which I do think will change next season. Even attempted carries can attract markers, and if a ball breaks fortunately, you're away. I feel we're too conservative on this front, and though our wide players get great numbers on their progressive carries, the fact Saka and Martinelli rank so high, but collectively we rank so low, proves to us that it's the central areas where we can be a bit more brave to take the ball and drive. That bravery also, in my opinion, needs to extend to our passing between the lines as well. Just looking at a sample of some passing networks from this season, where the brightness and width of the arrow indicates passes completed between the players, there always seems to be a strong connection between the centre-backs and the full-backs, and even the wingers, but those central connections look to be a bit off. Again, whenever I say this, I'm not asking every ball to be fired through the lines with every touch. It's just for me we're that 2 to 3% too conservative. Look at that ball to Mainu in the England game the other night. Even 1 or 2 of those a game, and you're cooking. Just as an example, look at a few samples of Man City's passing networks. Rodri is that hub, but healthier connections between the forward and back lines centrally, even if there are stronger connections elsewhere. Part of the problem here is the options that we have to pass to in the block. Ødegaard is much more comfortable dropping out of the block and receiving, and Rice isn't at his most comfortable with back to play. So who is there to pass to in the block? Eberechi Eze is definitely a player who I believe could receive high in the block with the on-ball personality to turn centrally and fix some of those mid-block issues for us by slicing through it. Smith Rowe is another option, and I'm not sure Eze is right for us totally in other areas, but if we do it, I'm so convinced that his is a skill we're really missing. And if we want to go all in on this idea, if we're not convinced by Smith Rowe, Eze could be perfect. He's just fun as well. Finally, while this isn't massively related to mid-blocks, quality and pace on the transition does help here. You can bait a team into pressing you with 1,000 passes and then burn them on the transition. And that pace is something I'd love to see us add to our forward line this summer. Last but not least, around teams. I think we have the players in the wide areas to put balls into the box with regularity and quality. My concern is who's in the box. It's not my favourite method of chance creation, if I'm absolutely honest, but if we add someone who is world-class in the air, for example, Victor Osimhen, that would be a way around the mid-block. Play to the wide areas, put the ball into the box. But something I feel we could definitely take more seriously, maybe even without a signing, is our half-space crossing. Again, you need a target, but if we did get this channel running centre forward, that could be it. The reason half-space crossing works so well, especially with the right angles, is it's so hard to defend. With a right footer on the right and vice versa on the left, that ball almost round the back of teams is a killer, as we see so many times from De Bruyne when he delivers with quality. This might take some shuffling round. With possibly a freer role for Martin Odegaard, do we begin to see some more passes like the one for Havertz in the Chelsea game from the left-hand side, despite me feeling he will stay on the right? Can we be braver with our usage of Fabio Vieira, who I still think has something to offer us in this half-space crossing regard, if we don't go into the market to close that skills gap? I've probably missed out your favourite way of breaking down a mid-block, with moving the ball quicker, shots from outside the box, maybe even a specific player, but I feel we've at least covered some good ground. And in many ways, it's your fault for having a favourite way of breaking down a mid-block. As I say, we are a bunch of nerds. Finally though, I do quite fundamentally feel, a lot of Fs, although signings will 100% help this, there does need to be a bit of a mentality shift from the manager and coaching staff. I'm not saying he's Southgate, but the way we use our wingers, the desire to recycle first, the ridding the squad of profiles whose ball usage isn't the most efficient, I get it, but it's on the conservative side. Can Arteta show us next season, whatever he changes to fix these issues, that he's willing to take a risk, that he's willing to allow a Saliba to go on a mazy dribble for how it might change the emotion in a game, that he might allow Saka to shirk his defensive responsibilities for a moment to let him be ready on the last shoulder for that ball over the top, that he wants his number 6 to be a bit braver on the ball. Sometimes, to win the biggest prizes, you have to take the biggest gambles. Hint, hint. Gareth Southgate. Wink, wink. If you like The Different Knock, you can support us on Patreon monthly, or you can buy us a coffee.